Well, good afternoon and welcome to everybody to the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park, where today we're having a roundtable discussion on the impact of AI and the positive forces that it can unleash. We're doing this in conjunction with version 1, and it's taking place in the newly refurbed part of the museum here. We're surrounded by a very shiny new set of furniture, and I hope people are bringing new shiny thoughts to the party as well. I'm going to just begin by asking the panellists to introduce themselves very briefly, and then what I will do is kick off with a couple of sort of slightly general questions about the way that AI is perceived in the world, and then we'll dive into some of the more specific examples that I think we'll be able to showcase this afternoon. So perhaps, Donald, I can kick off with you, and you could do a sort of one-sentence introduction, and we'll just go around the panel.
Sure, thanks, Dermot. I'm Donald Ewing from Dyslexia Ireland, and I'm the head of education and policy there.
Filippo, Sassi, I'm the head of the AI Labs in version 1.
Georgina Fuller, I'm a freelance journalist for national newspapers.
I'm Brad Mallard, the Chief Technology Officer for version 1.
Jacqui, Garrad, the National Museum of Computing's Museum Director.
Calum, Goodwin, I'm the Head of Partnerships and Giving Development at Encephalitis International.
Hi, so I'm Baxter, Principal Analyst covering AI at UK research and advisory firm TechMarketView.
Well, welcome to you all. Thank you all for agreeing to participate. As I said, what I would like to do is just to start off with a few of the, if you like, sort of war stories that are floating around either in the press or just sort of what people talk about, by the water machine or wherever it is. And if you ask me what people think about AI, then it tends to be typically a rather bleak picture of, well, surely AI is going to steal my job, or it's all very risky because machine learning is full of bias and sort of makes the wrong decisions because it's been taught badly, or large language models are going to destroy the planet because they're so energy intensive. I mean, essentially, if you hear the popular stories about AI, I think it's a fairly negative one. And I just wanted to kick off by asking you, from your different perspectives, whether all that's nonsense or whether perhaps there's a more nuanced view. Who'd like to have a go at that to begin with?
I mean, within my industry, it is already replacing journalists. And there are newspapers that are already using it for content creation, especially tabloids. So I'd say it's a fear-based response from journalists.
But without us having a round table like this, there wouldn't be anything for the AI to get its teeth into. So you're here as a person, you didn't send a robot. So it's kind of not entirely true, is it? That,
No, I mean, it's benefiting me by using for transcribing on a day-to-day basis any interviews, so that's saved hours per week of time. Yeah.
And what about some of these other things? I mean, are people right to be scared about these things? Is it more balanced? I mean,
so I mean, maybe just give my opinion. I think. Look, I mean, there is a lot of scaremongering. Interesting, we've been testing some of the apps we've been building with the National Museum earlier on with some of the children, school children here today. The perception from them is absolutely, kind of, well, the world's doomed. There's a sort of certain that kind of narrative, which I don't buy into at all. There is too much scaremongering from the press. It's great news. It's great front page articles, but for me, AI, of course, has got its risks, its implications around ethical and moral challenge and the sustainability or environmentals. For me, the good so far outweighs the potential risk, and how AI can be used for inclusivity and accessibility and providing solutions that other technology that's gone before just can't do, I think, is actually incredible. So,
and sort of yeah, those of you who are actually involved in providing assistive solutions then would obviously support what Brad's just said. So perhaps I need to put you guys on the spot and say, how are you doing things like addressing sort of safeguards type issues and energy consumption and some of these other things that are to a degree within your control? Dermot, you're nodding. Go for it.
We had some really interesting. I work in education, and so there is a great deal of fear about students using AI to generate essays and assignments, and therefore it's not their own work. And how does a school or a college protect around that? The initial response is probably fear-based, but it's created some interesting knock-on effects. For example, third-level colleges, some of my colleagues who are lecturers and professors have in the meantime said we're going to still do continuous assessment, but we're going to ask for presentations rather than 3,000-word essays. And when you think about the highest level of academia where someone's doing a viva for their PhD, it's not necessarily an efficient way, but it's a very good way to assess understanding of a topic. And from the world of dyslexia, someone being able to speak and be articulate about a subject can be a real strength. So I think it could be a bit of a levelling of the playing field and getting away from this dominance of the written word in terms of proving your academic ability.
Well, that's very interesting. And of course, people need presentational skills anyway, and our traditional paper-based exam system has meant that people actually can leave with top-class grades and be completely hopeless and at sea in the workplace where they actually have to interact with things that are not pieces of paper. But yeah, very interesting. What from your side, you guys sitting over there, how do you do things like control bias in machine learning and some of these other fears that we have, like the robot's going to steal my job? And
yeah, I mean, I think we've had a couple of different responses to it as a charity. We've been working with the version 1 team on some fantastic solutions for people who've had an acquired brain injury as a result of encephalitis. We were working on a translations tool, on a simplification tool, which will have undoubted benefits in how people can understand information on what is a complex condition and they've gone through a traumatic injury themselves. So I think as a charity team, we've seen the benefits of it. I think we've, like anyone in the world, have been exposed to what's being said in the press, and there's been some anxiety amongst our board and otherwise to adopting AI solutions, and there's a feeling that we need to get policies in place for how we are using AI going forward, and that we're not the experts to do so, which is why we've been consulting with the version 1 team. I think elsewhere, in terms of as a non-profit sector, I think AI has had a significant impact on lots of people's work. We were only part of a discussion not that long ago with a significant trust and foundation who provide funding to lots of national charities, who've said that they'd seen 4-fold increases in applications as a result of charities using AI tools to generate applications. So as a result of that, we've now put a statement on all of our applications to say that we don't use AI for generating applications, and it's daft that we have to live in a world where we have to do that. But that's having implications on charities and funding going forward. So we've kind of seen both sides of how useful AI can be for increasing accessibility to our resources for our community, but also as a sector, I think we're seeing AI being used perhaps negatively, which is having a severe impact on the world of charity fundraising at the minute.
That seems very interesting. So, I mean, where I think we seem to be getting to is that there's a slightly sort of defensive spirit about these stories that have appeared in the media and are making us feel that we have to somehow justify what we thought we were doing as force for good anyway. So maybe that's my fault for kicking off with the negative stuff. But perhaps we should shift it round to the positive side and then talk about how it is that AI has enabled some of you to deliver solutions and address questions of inclusivity that perhaps were not so easily done in a pre-AI era. Dawn, do you want to talk about that with reference to Dyslexia Ireland?
Yeah, so we've worked with version 1 to develop, I say we, version 1 have, with a little bit of guidance and consultancy from us, have developed an app which is very useful, and it's like a lot of very useful apps. It's quite simple in its design. It's trying to take complex text and simplify the language or the structure or the syntax to be of help to someone who might have a reading difficulty without diminishing the content, the intellectual product, if you like. Because we would always say around dyslexia, this is not a thinking issue. This is just a mechanical, often quite mechanical reading and spelling issue. So having something that's in your pocket and built into your phone where you can either photograph text or input text and then have it simplified for you would aid efficient understanding of that text. And like a lot of good apps, it's good for everybody if you have that functionality, but particularly good if you're dyslexic. And it, again, it's a cliche because it's kind of true, it levels the playing field. And it gets away from, it gives people independence as to how they approach text. You might need to use it sometimes or some parts of your day, but you might not need to use it at other times. And I think that's a bit of a game changer because the AI allows that to work very, very well. And I think even a few years ago that would have been very clunky, but now it seems to be very smooth and very naturalistic.
So can you help me with one thing here? So I'm sure that there were apps to put a sort of slightly old tech word into play that might have helped people with reading difficulties a few years back. But can you help us understand a bit more about how AI specifically has sort of brought an extra dimension to the solution?
I think it's just the intelligence in how it takes complex, say, academic text, or a classic example would be an abstract of a scientific paper, which, as we all know maybe from our studies, that's an abbreviated, quite technical, quite dense a paragraph or so, which is trying to take complex information and very quickly communicate it. As a result, it's quite hard to quickly access if you're dyslexic because of the technical terminology, because it's been very much condensed. By releasing the power of AI, it seems to allow that to be communicated without losing any of the intellectual power of the concepts or the model, but it just simplifies it in a way that doesn't dumb down the meaning.
Yeah, so it's doing far more than just being a reading app. I mean, okay, I don't think that I'm badly educated, but I know, I blame the author when it takes me 3 goes of reading something to, have a go at what it's trying to actually get at. And so I know exactly what you're talking about with abstracts of scientific papers. I always think that my profession being that of a writer, it's my job to try and write in a way that your app is not needed. But
it's funny because we spend a lot of time, a lot of our workshops sometimes are helping individuals when they access third level, college or university, to write in that academic style, which we all know there's a game to play sometimes in writing in a way that makes you sound intelligent. And then ironically, we're also using intelligent software to sort of then work that in reverse to say, this has to be understandable. The whole point of writing anything is to communicate ideas efficiently. Yeah. And journalists college will tell you that. Psychology college will tell you that. Write in a way that you can communicate your ideas.
And simplify everything so that people can understand it straight away.
Indeed, indeed. And there's that demand for plain language in our government, whether we're doing a leaflet on a vaccine. Public health consultants would say you have to write that to the level that most people will understand.
This is Georgina's job, so having to write so that everybody can understand it, even if you're writing in a fairly technical space. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's a mark of good journalism to make it accessible so that anybody can pick it up and to make a very complex issue available to anyone who reads about it. And
let me ask Jacqui to come in at this point, because I think you probably have similar challenges in a quite technical museum environment where you've got pieces of kit that take quite a bit of understanding.
Yeah, so we had various challenges when we happened to meet, and work with version 1, and we have a large museum full of working collections, and there is a story to every gallery, to every piece of kit in the gallery, and it's not just the story of the machine, but it's the oral histories of it, the social histories. There's so much to tell all in one space. And if you think about the fact that we have visitors, you know, from all over the world, international visitors coming to this museum, and we started this museum as a British museum. We were telling the story, you know, British computing. It's vastly grown. So we needed something that was accessible to all, so a bit like when you write, but also condensing it. So we have a script, a guide script that's 500 pages long, and that's been written by our experts in the museum that will say, in this gallery, this particular machine. Some galleries have 50 artifacts in it, so this is a lot to take in. So what we needed was something that where an individual, no matter where they came from in the world, could come into our museum and understand what space they were in and why it was here. That's the biggest bit, the piece of history. But on the side of our people, because we're a working museum, our people would do that deliver that message. But some of our volunteers and our guides can struggle with how they interpret the stories, because they want to tell you the heavy-ended, top level, you know, you could be here 5 hours on one gallery, you know, that kind of, because there's so much to tell. It's the history of computing and technology. So the tool for us has not only been, it's accessible in, you know, several different languages, but it's the personas for us. We've got 6 to 11-year-olds, we've got, you know, 16 to 20-year-olds, and then so on. So it gauges, the AI has regenerated that guide script into levels to match anyone's ability, and obviously having a visual aid and a hearing aid, it's so accessible for us. It's been a game changer, and we are not replacing our fabulous people, but we cannot train people and transfer the knowledge of this exceptional museum fast enough. So this tool is a buddy, it's a mate alongside what we do with people.
Yes, because I mean, one of the things that I find very remarkable about the National Museum of Computing, which is close to being unique, I suspect, is that when you come here, you're not viewing a load of things in glass cases. You have people that the volunteers and the staff here will interact with you and actually show you what it's for, what it's all about, how it works, and they know it inside out. And that's really quite unusual. If you go to most of the big flagship museums in central London, for example, you will find that you have to essentially interpret the objects for yourself, and that can be great. I mean, that works well for some kinds of people, but you might miss out a load of stuff. And here it's very, I mean, it's all about talking to people about things. And so the idea that you're finding this not a substitute for that, but a complement to it, I think that's
and it must really help learning as well, because children have to sort of interact and engage to learn, rather than just as you can't stand back and watch something if you're. Yeah.
And if you think about, you know, you have a family group come into the museum, you may have somebody that's 6 or 8 that might want to engage with the technology. It could be paper-based, but the technology in this example, and they might be curious about something in the museum or in that particular space, but mum or dad, grandparents might want to interact with the demonstration with an individual that will transfer knowledge to the max. And it just makes it so much easier. And I think different learning skills, not everybody wants somebody right in front of them. You know, you've got to have this personal space. I cannot fault this application, honestly. It's remarkable, and you can use it from wherever you are. You don't have to be in the museum, because we've got an online tour that works with it as well. So it's just getting better and better for me, I have to say. And what we said to the young kids today, you know, is, you know, what do you feel about it? How did it make you feel? How can we improve it? And the feedback was good, wasn't it? It really was good, because they were excited about and curious about the development, how it's happened, and they were asking those questions, not that this is just an application, how is it developed and designed, and then they got to meet you, and it's perfect. It's really sparked the conversations that we need today.
Hope you guys at version 1 are patting yourselves on the back. I want to bring in Calum, actually, if I can, because I think some of the challenges that you faced in your charity are similar, but they have a slight difference. And so I wondered whether you might want to sort of point up some of the areas in which you've found this to be helpful. Maybe you could just sort of, for the help of people watching this, sort of contextualize it a little bit, just give people a bit of a steer on what the problem that your charity is trying to address might be. I think that would be really, really helpful to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll try and do it simply, like the simplification tool that you developed for us. So, because encephalitis is a hugely complex condition, but in short, it's an inflammation of the brain. It's caused by an infection or an autoimmune response, and about 6,000 children and adults across the UK each year are affected by the condition. And depending on which area of your brain is inflamed, it can affect your cognition, your memory, your ability to read and write, whatever it happens to be. And so we wanted to try and evolve our information literature in a similar way to the simplification work that Donald talked about, that version 1 did with Dyslexia Ireland. And that's the first tool that we looked to develop with version 1, but also something else similar to what we were just speaking about with the museum, is we are a global charity, so we recognise that not everyone was accessing our literature, or not everyone who was coming to access our literature would do so in English. And at the minute, we were kind of we were engaging with version 1, we were paying a good amount of money to get static translations of information literature into one language, and what we wanted to do is have a resource that sat on our website that was able to both simplify and keep the quality of medical information that we need as a healthcare charity, and as someone who wants to make sure that medical information is accurate, which is of paramount importance to us, but also could dynamically translate into multiple languages. And I think it's something we're now going to pilot in 2025, which is hugely exciting for us as a charity serving a global population. So those are some of the unique challenges that we face as a charity and as a medical charity, making sure that we keep that quality of information, and that as a global charity we can translate into different languages to really improve our accessibility of information we're offering.
No, that's really helpful. All right.
No, I can add a point there, because I think your point there about quality is really apt when you look kind of across how AI is being applied across lots of areas of the public and private sector. Is that we've gone from, if we look back almost 2 years ago, people playing around with ChatGPT and using it for quite, making a poem or a bit of fun. Where we're moving to now is that organizations are trying to understand exactly how do you apply it in a very specific context, and how do you refine it with your data to make that context much more valuable. So I think we've moved very quickly, more so than other technologies, from a broad-based kind of approach of what AI can do to how can we apply it for very, very specific problems, which is what you're doing. And that's what you see across a lot of organizations, is there's a much stronger focus on things like data quality, on the security of that data, of how it's governed, even ethical considerations of how it is being used.
I think it's a very good point. Indeed, the three use cases have something in common, which is accessibility. So making the content more accessible for the kids, in the case of the museum, and people with encephalitis or anybody with dyslexia. As we said, it's not just simplification. You can't lose information, which is the hard part of that, because obviously the quality of what is coming out is key, and that's where the expertise come into play. So using proper prompt engineering, so people like Gitu, they can fine-tune the model in order to get the best information. This is the challenge of these tools, and luckily, right.
Can I, Filippo and Brad, I guess, ask both of you how you actually go about that? Because it seems to me to be quite difficult to know how the thing that you are building is actually going to deliver the accessibility or inclusivity that you're looking for. How do you actually measure it? I think that might be quite tough, it seems to me. Did you notice that he said you could? Yeah, that's a horrible one. You can deal with that.
I was expecting this question, which is the hard question. Matrix, how do you measure accessibility? That's a hard one, because you see, in order to measure something, you need a defined standard, a defined definition. But what does it mean accessibility? It means different things for the three use cases that we are discussing here. Yeah. So obviously, the best way, the main thing is evaluation for the submaterial subject matter expert, which, for example, for the museum where the kids, do you remember, Jacqui, when we launched it some months ago? So basically, it's collecting the data from the user and making sure that it actually does the job. In the case of the museum, I remember the simpler level, 6 years old, it appeared to be a little bit more complex than what was required. So we used, a different prompting, so we could simplify, so that now is better understood.
So maybe to build, because you did ask me, and I did sort of do my best to sort of grease the shoulder up. But
yes, you're sitting right next to me, so there is no actual escape.
I mean, just to give you a slightly different sort of flavour of an answer, maybe on this. Of course, there's technical ways and models and other such that we apply, and lots of testing involved. But maybe a different angle that's I think important is how you think about and build solutions, especially with generative AI, is very different to projects of the past. And it's all about the use case, all about the problem and how you solve it, which is actually the technology itself actually isn't the magic. It's understanding the problem and working with people and how you bring the human element to life. And to come back to one of the original questions, actually, I think whilst, of course, there's angles to kind of AI and humanity and other such, the two, for me, are far better together. And actually, what we described and discussed, plus the human ability to have kind of emotional intelligence applied to that and empowering people with technology is ultimately a good thing. But how you build solutions, how do you think about the end-to-end game of a solution, especially in any context, whether it's charity, private, public sector, the magic is in the end-to-end and the testing and then the tuning and the feedback iterative cycle of getting that right and the data and other such that goes into that is absolutely kind of paramount of importance to that, less than the actual technology and the model itself. We can come on to, I'm sure, about how do you make sure you get the right model, because there is some other charity and kind of NGO and sort of sector challenges in particular around cost that's obviously paramount. And I think everybody has the challenge of funding and other such, right? But there's a whole game around making sure you architect the solution such that you consider all the elements of a business, and financials is obviously a consideration, as is ESG and other such.
Okay, well, you're coming into an area that I wanted to explore a bit more as well, which is that essentially, to a greater or lesser extent, and with sort of differences here and there, but on the whole, we're dealing with groups of vulnerable people or people who might be in a disempowered position relative to the people who are providing the solution. So there's a sort of, I mean, whether you call that safeguarding, I don't know, but there's certainly a sort of a need, it seems to me, from an ethical perspective, to sort of build in checks and balances and to make sure that you're not generating positive feedback about what you're doing because kind of you're asking the question in a way that is designed to bring about the nice answer, and therefore you've launched a product that isn't actually quite as wonderful. I mean, I think that seems to me to be potentially quite an awkward area, particularly when you're dealing with third sector kind of clients. So let me put that one to you. You're keen to say something, Filippo. Go for it.
No, because part of accessibility is also inclusivity, and inclusivity should also be at the stage of design. That's why when we tested our kids, that's why in version 1 we have a group of dyslexic people, and we tested the application from them. So we got feedback to improve the tool. For example, we didn't have the highlighting tool that basically virtualize the act of pointing the finger on the word. This is something that we would have think about without this feedback. So including the users is a way to make the app more inclusive and more adapted to their needs, in my opinion.
What can I just about the data? Mm-hmm. Like that's obviously lots of headlines about that. Scary. Yeah. What happens with the data?
So we don't retain any personal data. In the case of the museum, the users just select the avatar, the closest persona, and the language, and that's it. So there's no data. The data that we are using for explaining the item in the museum comes from the museum itself. In case of the Dyslexia app, it could be there's no retention from the user. It's literally whatever PDF they are uploading. So imagine a white paper from the university And in case of the encephalitis, it's the actual website or PDFs that are already on the website, but we don't retain any kind of personal information. So.
That's
Maybe
good
just
to
to,
know.
again, build on that, I think it's important just to link back to to the encephalitis sort of situation as well. I mean, again, very, very different use case and type of data around specific medical information. The last thing you want is to give the wrong guidance to citizens and or medical staff around what to do in a situation, right? So kind of truly life-threatening potentially or life-impacting. So I think getting the risk posture right, whether it's ethical and morally or technically and other such around the output, I think is absolutely critical to the solutions. In some instances, National Museum of Computing here is a great example of that. We're more than happy to give that information direct to consumer, citizen, public, whatever it might be. In some instances, we're providing information that's arming somebody to deliver that information, and then certainly in areas like even public sector and government, as well as Encephalitis International's example here, it's about taking a lot of the time away so that people can deliver a much more empathetic and emotive answer that is more engaging, which is a very difficult subject in the instance of, and I've been there, as you know, my brother suffered from encephalitis at the age of 4, but having people to engage with that are truly, kind of connecting at a human level, it gets people to do that even more powerfully, just with the right information, So.
And I think it was also interesting that when we first started working with the version 1 team, we were actually looking at implementing an AI chatbot, weren't we, at the very start? And I think we took the decision, and perhaps it was due to, capability as well, but we took the decision not to do that because we wanted not to take away from our helpline and our support team that were providing, person-to-person support, because we felt like an AI chatbot was going to be too risky of, not giving that personal touch to support. And I'm sure that's going to be the same for hundreds of charities who provide important support through that way, but through information literature that could be simplified and translated and save us time in that respect. It was clear that was an area of work that could benefit from AI, whereas the kind of person-to-person support was perhaps an area that currently we weren't, wanting to kind of to implement AI, because perhaps coming back to the original point that we started of, because of the public's concern for AI in reducing the human element of support.
And I think, just add, come back to that point of so much of the AI at the minute is around augmenting people's roles. Initially there was a lot of fear about how it would take people's jobs, but actually what you realise is when you look across healthcare and charities, there's a lot of very overworked people doing a lot of overtime, and actually a big benefit of using these AI tools is actually get people back to working normal hours, get people back to being with their families. And there's actually huge benefits that often kind of go overlooked of just enabling people, like say, access to information, so those people can actually use their expertise, their guidance to help advise people.
So, can I ask you, Simon, while you're on stage, as it were, from your perspective, would you agree with the idea that perhaps all the negative stuff that we see perpetuated in the popular press is really just the fear of the unfamiliar, and once people get used to something, it just becomes like a normal app, and therefore it's like kind of ordinary. So for example, I think these days nobody cares two hoots about the fact that their passport control at the border is done by a machine rather than by an immigration officer. We don't notice, we don't fuss about that particularly, but there's presumably data sets involved and sort of all sorts of interesting things being collected about us. We don't give it any thought at all. Do you think that's right, or and that the whole public concern is overblown, or is it a bit more nuanced?
On the whole, obviously there's lots of different forms of how AI can be applied. I think in many cases, as we've heard from the example of almost how it's being used here at the museum, and some of the examples it is almost covert. You don't have to necessarily say, this is AI. It's kind of implied because it's a bot. You're talking to it. It's the experience and the context that you're using it, and it's really just enhancing those customer experiences. And whether that's in some examples we've seen with charities, or whether that's talking to a virtual doctor, for example. many of the barriers that we have are cultural ones, and ones born either of remembering how bad the AI technology was even 4 or 5 years ago, and there was obviously lots of fears then about, well, we certainly shouldn't be using it in healthcare contexts or areas of sensitive information because it was highly inaccurate. But what we've seen is with the development of these latest large language models is such a rapid improvement. So I think in most cases it is overblown, because actually it's about just enhancing either people's jobs, about providing access to information we already have. I think people should be wary about almost how people's data is being applied. It really comes back to the underlying, how is data used to generate your insurance premium, for example, or how is it used, how is your medical data being controlled, your sensitive information. Those are areas perhaps of more concern that people should be focused on, rather than the AI sitting on top as an application itself.
So maybe just to, if I may, there's a couple of interesting points. I think the examples we just talked about in the main are more classical, traditional machine learning AI techniques and types of solution. You could use your Google Maps or your satellite navigation. Even landing the plane at the airport actually is often done using an AI, right? So as is the Docklands Light Railway, and et cetera, et cetera. So some use cases and some elements of classic AI are absolutely just embedding. You don't call your sat nav an AI sat nav, right? So it's kind of it is what it is, and you accept it for that. I think Simon's point is actually really interesting, that there are some use cases. Social media is a good example. It's where there is a yin and yang of, there's lots of good in the recommendation engines and other such, but that comes at a price, and you have to choose how you ethically and morally decide to be in that game. Now, one of the interesting things on generative AI, if I might go there for a minute, I think is one of the big differences for me is generative AI plays far more to the human side. So whereas classic AI generally is an enabler to make decisions and recommendations and other such, generative AI is playing far more in the realm of, to use one of those buzzword technicalities you mentioned sort of earlier, to sound intelligent, multimodalities or modalities, kind of, which is language, voice, audio, video, imagery, etc. And I think because generative AI plays far more in this realm of traversing and conversing with humanity, there is a bigger hurdle to drive and jump, I would argue. So selecting the use case is critical, and where you go, as I say, go direct to public, direct to person or not, or you use it to just empower people, I think is really important. And most solutions, I would argue, generally are empowering people to deliver a better message, and we shouldn't lose that, I don't think. But it's a great creative tool, a great empowering tool. But I think it will come some way yet before we can actually kind of converse directly, and with the robots that are taking over.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Can I just say, I think the biggest thing here, and for us, is the National Museum of Computing. We should be ahead of the game. That's what everybody expects. We're ahead of everyone and understanding things. The biggest thing here is education. If we just made sure that somehow a couple of years ago AI was new, and we all just went sorry, and we had to do a whole display on the digital origins of AI, and we can take it right back. And it was the same with cybersecurity when those buzzwords came out. If we just offered a bit more education for the mum, the dad, the grown-up, the team in the office, at the newspaper, and just say, right guys, this is here. Why don't we have a team building day where we talk about and use it and see how it works? Because then that will spark inspiration and conversation. I just don't think we're educating people enough, and I think we should all be doing more.
That's where the fear comes
from.
That's the fear.
Yeah. So you don't know. It was the same. We have.
All right, but there's a challenge there. I mean, it's all very easy to say we need to educate people better. I don't disagree with you, but then the question is how, because either we can put the burden on overworked school teachers and to say here's another thing you've got to try and fit into your day, or we can put the burden on the journalists, and then they're going to tell me, well, hang on, what's the story here?
What about the government's role in all of this?
And the government are going to say, well, they've got £56 billion deficit or whatever it is that they're trying to plug. I think this is actually quite challenging, actually, which is how do you change a social perception of something? And
I think I'm not an expert on AI, but the advice I've been given by by people who know more than me is start using it. And I've got a nice little story about empowerment and enabling. I assessed a chap in his 60s once for dyslexia. The reason for coming for an assessment was his grandson had recently been assessed, and he wanted to show solidarity with his grandson, that they were going to be team dyslexia in this family. So after I was talking to him about being dyslexic after the assessment, I started to talk about some text-to-speech. And immediately when I said the term text-to-speech functionality, he glazed over. And then I grabbed his phone and I said, can I just show you something? And they said, with your permission, opened up a text message from his wife, selected the text, and it was read out loud to him in this was a few years ago, so it was a nice enough, I think it was probably an American accented voice, but nowadays I'm sure you could select that for all types. And he said, he stopped sort of looking confused and said, that's amazing. I think he might have sworn as well. I think he said, that's something amazing. Son, I think I've got son, amazing son. And he said, can you put that on my phone? And I said, that is your phone. And he left at that point. He was like, that's all I need to know. And it was easier to work around an issue that he dealt with all his life, just with a bit of enabling technology. And there was I think the proof of any app or any functionality is you don't need to read a manual.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on a couple of points you mentioned earlier, one in particular is around governments and kind of where they can help. I mean, in the context of AI, there's a great piece of work by the Tony Blair Institute recently, looking at AI across the UK government. The potential savings of using AI will come to the multiple billions, which generally between, and we see this already in the solutions we built, somewhere between 10 and 20 times the return of the cost that you get in a return on investment. There's a cost impact, of course, but actually what's really important, and we see this with a couple of other customers we've been working with actually, which is in the legal system, for example. How do you provide a much more personalised service? Great as a win. How do you do that streamlines and gets people through the courts much quicker? And that's in the instance of this is actually about the children and families and sort of the sort of mediation through the court service. So that sort of situation. The quicker you can resolve that, but give that in the context of an empathetic delivery is absolutely critical, I think, which is kind of an interesting example. And on another example is around learning and education, actually. With a global private school organisation we're working with. Also interesting is, and this is the same private or public kind of tutoring, there's a general acceptance of every teacher is at least on average working more than 8 hours a week on extracurricular elements of marking, lesson planning, etc. If we can reduce that, you're going to get a much better quality of education. You can spend more time with students and other such. So that's the sort of stuff around the future of education. Interesting, you sort of talked about ChatGPT earlier as well, about kind of how that's impacting the classroom. Actually, I mean, we need to think about how we change policies and the guidance to embrace AI, because you can't fight it. It's coming. There's no point trying to defend it, but it's about doing it well and responsibly, and that's the critical element of this. But if you get it right, it's going to be a win-win-win for everybody, I think. So.
I'm going to add this. So we talked about how we can educate. I think we all agree that we all need educating, all of us here. We're continuously being educated on this. So if we're doing this now, we're sharing and we're educating people on the little bits we know or what we've done and we're users of it. But actually, if everyone in industry, government, just was a little bit more honest to say, this is where we're using these tools, that would help all the scaremongering, because it would be almost a compulsory, a standard format. We're all using it. We already are. We just need to be a bit honest about it. And that becomes part of our daily lives. People are going, oh, did you use, oh, it was, that's where I think we start. We're here now already.
And then as you educate, it's sort of like the snowball effect of use cases and benefits. And we're
learning. We're all learning together.
Okay, so I'm with you. I'm with you all on all of that, but the fact is that we have got some other use cases that are not represented in this room at the minute, where people have been using AI techniques to achieve things that might be designed to, for example, rig elections or achieve other outcomes which I think we would regard as being either morally dubious or sort of perhaps on the wrong side of a line. So we do need some sort of ethical benchmarks here, don't we? And I think one of the things that troubles me slightly is that I don't actually know who sets the ethical benchmarks, and the danger I see in all that is them being set by the people who actually got history in terms of bringing about some of those negative use cases that I was hinting at just a moment ago. So how do we control that, and what do people think about that?
It's a very big question, isn't it? And social media and algorithms, and we know, the influence that's had on elections, on children, on the negatives that Andrew takes, the themes that are being put out there, which once they're out there, and I think that's partly where the fear comes from, with that Pandora's box. It's here, it's happening, and that's when it's not being used for the greater good. And who polices that? Who takes responsibility for that?
I'm delighted if you want to sit on the ethics panel and sort of help things move in the right direction. But what ethics panel? Who's in charge? Where's it coming from? And is it any use for the UK, for example, to have its own ethics panel on this kind of stuff? Because the fact is that tech is international. It's a borderless thing, and
So to give you maybe just an instant thought on it, I think is that there's two sides of this, which I think is interesting, and I was actually honoured to be part of a team involved in the EU AI Act establishment as well a little while back. And the UK is still looking at its own pro-innovation policies and other such. But there's a really interesting angle, I think, of getting that right. I think it's important to think about not just the technology itself. There's the technology vendors, and of course they control the data that goes into these models, the outputs and other such. As with any technology, actually how you implement the technology to solve a problem, to solve a use case, how you think about the design and the architecture of the end-to-end solution, that is actually a bigger risk. And there's lots of guidance to the technology vendors. Keeping up with their pace of innovation is clearly a challenge regulatory, but how you actually provide guidance to delivering a robust and responsible solution is actually more important, I feel, than just the technology itself, because you can wrap different controls around that. You can think about regulatory controls around that and policies, reporting, auditability, quality controls and other such that are absolutely integral to the actual meaningful output. I mean, the reason technology gets a lot of focus is because that misuse, the over-the-line elements, they do need to do more to protect that fundamentally at the core. But you're never going to avoid that multiplier effect of multiple different technologies to be applied in different contexts. And that, for me, doesn't have enough regulation yet, I think. So.
Just about, I mean, there's an accountability on organisations who are developing AI to build in those ethical frameworks into what they're doing, because we look at the regulation, we know the UK has been slower than the EU and other areas to develop this, and you talked about harmful areas. You've got things like deepfake content, for example, which is woefully kind of unregulated at the moment, really. I think the challenge the government has often is that they cannot keep pace with innovation, with regulation. That's constantly the battle. So there is definitely an onus on the government to have to do more to try and be more flexible and agile to adapt. But I think also the private organisations themselves, when they work with companies like Version 1, they should be building those ethical frameworks, those guidelines about whether they should use a certain feature or function, whether they should develop AI in a certain manner, or potentially not.
I see where you're coming from. I perhaps have some reservations. First of all, that I'm slightly nervous that making rules doesn't necessarily hit the right targets. So the people who will obey the rules are the people who probably weren't doing the harmful stuff in the first place. So there's that consideration. But then I'm also worried about the third sector, because I tend to feel, and maybe we can shape the rules in a way that this doesn't happen, but I'm nervous about it, which is that rules tend to have really quite burdensome impact on third sector services and activities, which aren't easily solved. So in the commercial world, you can put your prices up if you get hit with a load of rules. But in the third sector, there aren't any paying customers, so you can't do that. And so I sort of worry about having a new rule book to comply with, because everybody's got to comply with it, and then suddenly you've got more to do with very limited resources. So let me get a reaction from you two guys about this.
To a degree, I mean, I'm thinking of GDPR regulations when they came in. That was something we had to get our head around. But I think sometimes smaller charities can be quite agile, and also a lot of the regs can be managed in an efficient way without, I think, and in many ways, AI might also provide solutions. And if you were to balance all the risks against the benefits, so you could say this about steam engines, gunpowder, there's benefits to gunpowder, there's clear problems and moral implications.
How you use it, isn't it?
It's how you use it, yeah. And I think, it's here to stay. It's I think in many ways harnessing the power, and then reasonable, which is the word a lawyer would use probably, but it's reasonable steps to put reasonable guardrails in place. Yes. And I think it has to just be, it's a terrible phrase, I'm sorry, but it's an iterative process. We can't expect governments to be ahead of the technology. But at the same time, I don't think the Wild West kind of like moral panic is necessarily that justified in terms of, and to answer your question about the third sector or smaller organisations, there is that sort of additional thing, but we're used to that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that, and I think it comes back to the point that we were making about the awareness of AI and educating people about it, because for us, for our charity in particular, it's great that we've developed this simplification tool, the translations tool, but before we can actually implement it on our website, well, we need to have an AI policy. And how do we develop an AI policy when we're a team of 17 staff who aren't really AI experts? And that's where, we've done some consultation with Brad and the team to build that policy, but we need rules and regulations to then follow from the government to be able to put it into a policy that we can then say, well, we've got this, now we're happy to use AI. And I think that's where they're important. But I think we've kind of half touched on it a little bit. It also raises an issue of equity in terms of using AI. So often for us as non-profits, we're kind of sometimes a bit behind the edge when new emerging technologies come along, because we aren't a for-profit company. We can't afford to invest in AI as much as perhaps a for-profit can. And so I think whilst for us it's been amazing and perhaps a bit of serendipity in a way that we met Brad and the team, but if we weren't, if we didn't have that personal connection and we hadn't have done that, will charities be left behind by AI? I think is a real concern, and the affordability of AI I think is a topic we've probably not touched on yet, but is something that is really important to us as a sector.
Well, we're getting towards the end of our session, and just before we wrap up, I just wanted to check in with each of you in case there are some issues that we ought to have been discussing that we haven't yet. Georgina, can I start with you and think, are there any things that you think we should have been covering, or things that you're worried about, or trends that you're observing, or things that you think ought to be on the industry to-do list, or anything like that you think we should perhaps have
I think we've been pretty comprehensive. I think, the ethics issue is obviously one that needs exploring and needs, we need guidance and the education. That those would be my main concerns, and those have been covered. We've touched on them anyway.
So that was what you came into the room hoping we'd get to at some stage.
Yeah,
good.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, good. I'm feeling positive about this. Filippo, what about from your perspective? Are there issues that you think we should have come to that we haven't really explored properly yet?
No, I think we touched pretty much upon everything, including ethics, which is obviously very important, regulation, the fact, the cost of AI, and why some people perceive AI as scary, and perhaps it's not as scary as it is. So no, I think we touched pretty much upon everything.
I think it's got great. There's risks in education. I started off with a story about the risks of plagiarism or not your own work. But I know many teachers who are using AI, and they're talking about it transforming the teaching they do, and therefore the learning that young people are getting. And I think that's the bit for me. It's just making sure that we don't we embrace this as much as possible. And again, I think the message for today is about partnership is a good approach here. So I mean, we couldn't have developed the app that was none of the technical skill. But equally, we tend to have a bit of a grumpy face when people come to present products to us. We've developed this for the dyslexic children, and you look at it and our grumpy face stays grumpy. In this case, my CEO and I were not grumpy because this was the third time that we'd spoken to version 1 about it. So I think it's engaging with partners early and keep engaging with them, and critically your customer feedback. When I go to my local supermarket, I press a button to say how was it today? The smiley faces and the green faces. In education and in other parts of civic life, we never get feedback from the punters. And I think if we do that, as well as some data about usability and functionality and accessibility, that's going to put us in a pretty good place to think about how we proceed.
Yes, that's very interesting. I mean, we've been talking quite a lot about education this afternoon, and I think one of the concerns is that it is quite difficult to reshape educational delivery. I mean, it tends to be very much a sort of political plaything, and my sense is that means we end up in a more conservative space, conservative with a small c, than perhaps we could be. So there might be some interesting examples from other countries where they've been more agile at adopting AI solutions, and maybe we can learn from that.
It's a good point now, because now that you're talking about that, a friend of mine, she's a teacher in the States, and instead of forbidding ChatGPT, what they did now is to give the homework, well, use ChatGPT, and then you will be great the following day on how, as a human, you improve the output from the model. So basically, it's a way to teach them how to use the tool.
ChatGPT is only regurgitating what was already out there. It's not really creating anything. It's not writing the next novel.
Exactly. So the task is how you
it is, but it's really bad. Okay, so let me ask you four guys as well. Who shall we start with? Simon, why don't you? What should we have covered that we didn't?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of really good ground around how AI can be applied in different contexts in charities and government and public sector areas. I think the important thing to remember with AI is that it is an enabler, right? It is the latest in a number of technologies. It's not acting in isolation itself. There's a huge amount of work that goes into getting, the data, the infrastructure, the culture right. I think the important thing for a lot of organizations to remember is that it's a journey. It's not a one-off. You're not implementing just one app and that's it, and that's you're done with AI. It's going to continue on for probably decades, and there will be constant evolutions.
Sorry, there are going to be more people coming in and saying we've got something wonderful for you.
There will.
Grumpy face. Don't turn.
There will be more tech. There will be more buzzwords. There will be more things that you're going to have to grapple with to understand. The important thing to remember is that it's the outcome, not the tech, that's important. So it's not about focusing on how can we use AI. Yes, you can have an AI strategy, but it should be how can we improve our customer experience? How can we improve our access to information? Sometimes that AI, sometimes that is just better. Cloud technology is, focusing on the outcome, focusing on the person and the role. That's kind of the important bit, really. I think sometimes we get quite hung up on the tech itself, but as long as we just remember that is just in a long line of technologies with more to come.
Yeah, and I think that last point echoes what kind of we've been speaking about today. It's the people behind the AI as well, both in terms of those who are testing it and those who are developing it, wanting to do it for good. I think for me, wearing the hat of trying to balance the budget for a charity, it's us wanting to make sure that AI doesn't leave behind charities in terms of both investment and expertise. And I think that's my, although slightly pessimistic, slight final comment, really.
Jacqui.
What have I taken today? I think that I can absolutely say hand on heart that what we as a charity have been enabled to create with the team at version 1, it is AI for good. I have to say, we've had it now for nearly a year. The customer feedback, so I can sit here and say, oh, isn't this a great idea, and look what we've done. But actually the user cases, the customer experience from all walks of life. Today, I had a teacher in front of his students say, this is great, and by the way, I use ChatGPT, and the kids were kind of like, oh, sir, but you know what, just being honest and saying this, we are enabling people, you've enabled us. I sit here and say that we just have to keep being good advocates for using it safely, and work together, and how, you know, it can get better. So yeah.
Well, that's a very nice note to bring us to our conclusion. Brad, do you want to just have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Maybe just a couple, but just to reinforce that. I mean, listen to the room and the fantastic panel members here. I think we started with, you know, AI is about replacing people, and you know, we're all doomed, and this kind of the end is nigh. You know, it's kind of.
No, it was my fault.
But look, I mean, listen to the room. This is all about people. It's about people achieving far more and achieving stuff that was never possible without the advent of AI. And I mean, what better place in the world to be talking about this than sitting here in Bletchley Park with the National Museum of Computing. But I think it's just a fascinating discussion, and I don't think we should lose it. It's about people, and AI becomes much more powerful for the world. I mean, that for me is a great message. If I want to start, I'll leave it there. But,
thank you. Well, that is the note to end on. Thank you to all of the panellists for participating this afternoon. And that's me, Dermot Turing, signing off from the AI for Inclusivity Roundtable at the National Museum of Computing. Thank you very much.